one day also I was talking to my mother. She just straight up rebuked me, bro. She was just like, how many times are you gonna go back into slavery? Getting out of debt and then going back into debt. I didn't like how she said that, but that's a really good point.
So you view your role as a finance expert as a call from God?
Absolutely.
If I'm being completely honest, there are things that I do sometimes and my motivation is not God.
Before I had a change in perspective, I would say that I was not someone that anyone should really listen to about money.
When you bought the car using a credit card?
I bought it using a car loan.
Right.
And I was confused because I thought I had a good credit score. But I realized that they have different financial models that they use.
A lot of us carry debt and we somehow have normalized what it does to us. So at the time that you had this debt, what would you say was doing to you? Was it just numbness? Was it stress? Saying God wills some people to use credit cards and some others not to?
Absolutely.
How so?
Absolutely. So
So Shawn, welcome to the Conscious Lane.
thanks a lot.
I would just like us to start from sort of the scratch-ish. So would you mind taking me back to where you were with money, right, before you found your footing? Is something that we've touched on our previous conversations. So before you became this person who has the current perspective that you have on finances in general, could you take me back to what was happening before that, who you were before that?
And I think I'll just go back to where I was at K.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was there, I didn't really have much understanding of how to manage money at all.
And by K, you mean college, right?
Yes, sorry, at Kalamazoo College.
Yes.
So there from 2014 to March of 2019. And I was just terribly irresponsible with money, I think. I was good at creating ideas that could earn money. But in terms of managing it, I really didn't have any concept other than using it on whatever I desired to have. So like my desire would drive what I spent the money on. And I don't know that there's a lot of complexity to it other than that. I mean, we started a company and raised capital to fund building an app project from 2015 to 2017. And that was feasible, but it didn't require much management of the money because the majority of the money, that we raised went directly to paying for expenses to get the project completed. So before I had a change in perspective, I would say that I was not someone that anyone should really listen to about money.
So what changed?
I was convicted of my sins in 2017, and that was like with sexual immorality, that was with drug use, that was with general attitudes of like hedonism and just thinking that I could make whatever decision that I wanted to make and there wouldn't really be any repercussions for it. And I first noticed this change with respect to money in accounting class. So, do you remember me telling you that I took accounting 3 times when I was at K?
Okay. I'm not sure I remember. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I took accounting my freshman year, and I think I got a D that time. The second time I took it, which was my sophomore year in 2016, I was pretty much going to get another D or an F, and kind of by God's grace, I had a concussion, and so I didn't end up finishing that semester. So I didn't see what would have become of that attempt in the class. And then I took it again my senior year after I repented, and I got an A- and was teaching other people in the class how to do it. And I started to look at what the difference in my heart was, because that's where I wasn't comprehending. I feel like my mind has always been able to comprehend, but the motivation to use what I'm able to comprehend was lacking. And I could see in my heart all types of questions like, why does this have to be accounted for in this way? Why can't these categories be blended? And after repenting, I started to realize that I had a respect for order in my heart, which made me able to use what I was learning in accounting in real life. And so that was the first thing I noticed, and then I had, by some way, was introduced to Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, so I went through that. And then that started to shape a lot of my thoughts about how to manage money. And I went through that 2 times, one time by myself, and then one time with my wife, Nikki. And I think the first time was actually at Kalamazoo College, and that was, I think, my senior year, like going into 2019, because I watched it with our friend Ray Hum, one of the episodes. And then in 2020, I watched it with Nikki, and in 21, I took the Dave Ramsey Financial Coach Masterclass, and so I got to learn how to manage it from the aspect of helping other people think through the decisions necessary for them to manage it. And so I call that managing by influence.
Okay.
Then it was April of 2021. I was halfway through an MBA program at Cornerstone University. The managing partner from New York Life, Michigan reached out to me, and he reached out on 3 occasions via LinkedIn message. And so when I would look at the message, I honestly didn't have any desire to be in the finance industry. And so I read it, but didn't respond. But after the 3rd time, I thought, he's unusually persistent. Like, I've had a lot of people in this space reach out right now because COVID was happening. And there's a shortage of financial folks and virtual opportunities in fields where people had high earning potential was attractive for a lot of people at a time where they didn't want to have to be around other people. So his persistence caused me to ask God, like, God, do you want me to go into this industry? And that led to one day me going to Fox Key on 28th Street in Grand Rapids to get an oil change. And I was reading the managerial finance book, which started to talk about bonds. At the time, I didn't know what a bond was at all. And so I asked inside of myself, because of some of the gifts the Lord had given me, what is a bond? And I heard a whisper back to me saying, ask the man across from you. He's a financial professional. Candidly, at the time, I was also trying to suppress my gifts because I didn't understand how to connect with people well. So having the extra information that God would speak to me usually resulted in me thinking that people were just intentionally being dishonest about things, and I would be frustrated instead of using it to connect with them or help them, because I didn't understand how to do that. And so I didn't talk to the man. And so then he starts to talk to me, and he asked me what I was reading. He says, essentially, you're reading about medicine or numbers, and the book isn't thick enough to be about medicine, so you must be reading about numbers. And that opens up the conversation about finance and the question that I asked within myself about what a bond was. So he broke down for me what a bond was, other investment types, and then I laid before him this question that I had laid before God about going into the industry, and he told me, of course, I should. He told me what licenses to get. Started with a Series 7 and 63, and so I took his advice and got my 7 and got my 63, and then started the journey at New York Life.
Okay. So you view your role as a finance expert as a call from God?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that inform your practice? And if so, how does that inform your practice? What differentiates what you do from what most other people who are financial planners, whom I've also spoken to, what differentiates your practice from what they do?
I guess for context, I would add that there was a time where I felt like the motivation that I had to serve God in what I was doing at New York Life was not congruent with the culture of New York Life from a coaching perspective, which seemed to be more focused on outcomes for the advisor or the financial professional than outcomes for the clients.
Okay.
Right. Now, that probably wouldn't be said, but that was my read on the culture and how the training was conveyed to motivate the advisor. And so I took some time, a few days, to go to this place called the Prayer Garage downtown Grand Rapids and just ask God, why did you bring me here to do this? Because I don't want to do what is being presented to me. And he started to teach me from the parables, and he began to teach me about stewardship. Luke 16, because this is one of the parables that has had the biggest impact on my thought process and how I run my practice differently from many other advisors. And so there were a few things that I noticed when reading this that inform financial outcomes for people and life outcomes. And it is the principle of what I do and why the practice is called Fair Stewardship Group. That principle is called stewardship. And essentially what I understand that to mean is that stewardship outwardly is the expression of faithfulness and respect for the things that have been entrusted to a person by someone else. And so for people to experience increase on the inside as they manage what they've been given on the outside, the relationship with the person who gave it to them has to be strong in order to do that. And so my practice focuses on helping to cultivate, maintain, sustain, and develop that relationship with God, the person who's entrusting the resources to the people that I work with. Knowing that, like I mentioned to you, I think via text, that blessings always outperform practical outcomes.
Okay.
And so when I sit down with people, I focus more on the posture of their heart towards God and the actual assignment that He gave them before we talk about the financial plan. Because to have a plan, we have to first understand what we need to accomplish. You see, so if God is the one who gives the assignment, I can't make a plan unless the assignment is revealed. And so the person that I'm talking to has to know, or we have to explore that by seeking out the Lord. And I think that's a big differentiator, because a lot of people, just by training, will sit down with someone and ask them what are their goals. And this is how we started with Thrive at 2. Like, what are your goals? You want to retire this time? You want to buy a boat here? You want to do this? And then we just map their resources and their finances to those goals. We find that a lot of people don't actually execute those plans because there's friction between those plans and what has actually been given to them to do by God.
Okay. So do you then only work with Christians?
Yeah.
Okay. So if someone had a need for planning their finances and getting their financial plan on track and their approach to, but they were not a Christian, would that be a conversation you'd be willing to have with the person? Like, how would you go about advising such a person?
Well, I think I would have to talk with such a person to know. And I mean that because everyone is different. And so I would not generalize everyone who doesn't believe in Jesus to one conversation pathway.
Okay.
I would want to hear the heart of the person. I would want to hear what's going on in their life to see if God will give me insight into what He wants to do with them so that I can see if that resonates with them. Because if they are open to God's word for them, then we can work together. And to me, that's really the difference, not necessarily the title of Christian or not Christian, but is someone receiving vision and a path from God, or are they willing to accept godly counsel that actually comes from God and not just my opinion.
Okay. So I agree with you that the conversation about money goes way beyond just the currency. I've spoken with a lot of people, even outside of this podcast, and I've also interviewed some people as well who are financial advisors, and you find, and even from my own personal experience, I found that there is definitely a gap between what you know and what you do. So there is knowledge gaps that exist when it comes to how people spend money, but I've also seen that even when that gap has been bridged, people don't always do what they know to be either reasonable or logical. So then, and I'm hearing you say that you have kind of identified what that gap is. Or rather, when you advise people, you're not just trying to be like, hey, go do this, you have all of this knowledge, now go and act on it, because you've seen that there's friction, right, between what that person knows and what they want to do and then what they eventually end up doing, right? Is that what you're describing?
You can tell me if this is how you're thinking about it.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that my focus and goal is to help the person who knows what God is asking them to do to take the steps to follow through on that. And as we're exploring what they feel they need to follow through on that, that conversation typically will yield confessions of certain beliefs that they have that are contrary to them following through, or certain knowledge gaps, or certain pains or fears. And so just in the pursuit of developing faithfulness, those gaps are exposed.
Okay.
Right? I don't try to find the gaps first, because I think that is...
Like you're working backwards.
Yeah.
You talk to people and then you identify some of the mindset that they might be carrying, which could be contrary to the goal that they're trying to actually get to. So you're more trying to work with them through those ideologies and mindsets. So what are some of those that you've found, like over the years, as you've worked with people?
I think the biggest one is fear.
Okay.
And I think in almost every case that someone does not follow through on a plan, they've been afraid of something. And it's never following through on the plan that they're afraid of. See, the plan is just the execution steps to get what they said that they want. We also have to understand there's a difference between what we think in our minds sometimes and what we believe in our heart.
Okay.
So while we say we might want something, and we might actually want it in our mind, we have to know, what does the heart believe about what we want? And so people I've seen be afraid of, being successful because no one else that they know or no one else in their family has done what they've done. They don't believe that the person can achieve it, and the person doesn't want to be wrong. They don't want to fail. And so they rather do something that is defensible in the eyes of other people. Some people struggle with deeply rooted childhood-based rejection, or even self-rejection.
And this is impacting their finances.
And this is impacting their finances. Because, see, the thing about being successful is that a person has to be willing to receive success. Right?
Tell me more about that. What does that mean?
Okay, so have you ever had an experience where someone did something that was really kind for you? They gave you something and you felt you didn't deserve it, and you told them that you couldn't take it. They insisted that you take it, and then you took it, but you still didn't even really feel like you deserved it.
Yes.
Okay. See, the difference is that when God is asking to partner with someone in something, it requires that they believe it. So it's not a situation where he says, no, I insist, no, I insist. It's, this is what I have for you. And we see that, right, when Moses is leading the people into the promised land, right? They're on the mountain, they've sent the spies out. 2 come back with a good report and say, we can do this, the Lord is with us. And then you have 10 spies, they just, negativity, we can't do it. The people are giants, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. And God gets angry at the people because they received the testimony of the spies that were not faithful. And so then God tells Moses to take them into the wilderness. Moses shares this, and the people say, no, we'll go to the promised land. And God essentially says, and I'm paraphrasing, it's too late. You missed the window of grace. And so he raised up a faithful generation who was willing to go into a situation that was much greater than their personal capacity.
Okay. So some people feel unworthy. They feel they don't deserve to succeed. They don't deserve to attain a certain level of success. So you mentioned fear, and then the feeling of not being worthy, I think is how I'll describe it. Okay. Is there anything else that you observe?
I think that is probably the biggest hindrance because people are afraid of different things.
Okay.
Right? So fear is a really broad category. And you kind of think about it this way, it's just like anything that is emotionally painful for someone to experience when they're young can turn into something that is a long-term trauma rooted in fear.
Okay. Sounds like I need to go examine myself to know if I'm carrying any traumas that might be impacting my approach to money. For your behavior to change, your mindset has to change first. So most of the times we think it's the other way around. We just want to know the things we want to do differently and just want to go do them. Mm-hmm. But we've not gone through the process of changing our minds to actually do those things, right? Mm-hmm. And so then I wanted to ask you, because I remember from, back in the days, it's been a while since we started talking about money. And I know there was a time that you had credit card debt and loans, car loans, and all of that. So being that you're a person of faith, how did you work through that process of coming out of all of that? What change in mindset had to happen, and what was your process like?
So I guess the process was twofold. Was one, I got to me it was surprising the amount of credit limit that I was able to get as a college senior. I think it was like $5,000 or something, and I didn't really have a substantive income at that time. And so I was going to Best Buy, and I remember getting a $700 Apple Watch because I had seen other people with Apple Watches, and I thought, well, so right. I don't know how they're doing the Apple Watches now, but back then I put it on and I was like, this thing doesn't do anything. We're $700. And I already had an iPhone, so it was like, well, see the message on my wrist. If I'm so busy I don't have my phone in front of me, then I just wait till I pull my phone out when I'm done, And
so you were buying things that you didn't necessarily need.
Yeah, you don't want to know. So I ended up taking the watch back. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it was a process of me starting to evaluate the actual value of the things that I was purchasing. And then the one day also I was talking to my mother, and this was a really big catalyst for my turning point. She just straight up rebuked me, bro. She was just like, how many times are you going to go back into slavery? You keep getting out of debt and then going back into debt, and you keep getting... And I just thought about it, and I was like, that's I didn't like how she said that, but that's a really good point. That's a really good point. And so that started the fire in me, and so I started paying off credit card debts and, committed to just getting rid of them because for me at the time it wasn't going to work out with just having them and not using them because to me that was a temptation. So I started working on that and then paying student loans. And then when Nikki moved in with me, and Nikki's my wife, for those who don't know, sorry, I felt, even after some months, the Lord's leading to focus on paying down debt altogether, which also now included a car loan that I had gotten in 2018, I believe. And so around about, I think we had, between the two of us, $35,000 in consumer debt, and at the time I was a ship shopper, and so as he had led me to focus on paying down debt, even being challenged by my dad, I doubled down on that conviction. And then when COVID hit in March of 2020, our income like tripled, and for a time we were making like 10K for a couple months, and then as they started to onboard more shoppers, I think up to like 300,000. The gains started to get smaller and smaller, but over a year and a half, we were able to pay down 35,000, which was all of our consumer debt. And so that was how that went. It was a combination of going through the Dave Ramsey programs, actually testing things out in real life to see like, is this even worth the money that I'm spending on it?
Mm-hmm.
And then someone that knew me and loved me to rebuke me and essentially tell me what I was doing was stupid. And and for me to think about that and make a decision after evaluating the validity of what she said, what I experienced, and what I wanted.
So at the time that you had this debt, what would you say was doing to you? Was it just numbness? Was it stress? Because I think a lot of us carry debts and we somehow have normalized what it does to us. So if you think back to that time, what would you say was the impact that it was having on you?
I think at that time it was just an enticement, right? I had really low living expenses back then, so it wasn't like a financially stressful situation at that time, but I think I was also emotionally immature, and there's a lot of things that I had seen people have or do that I wanted to be able to have or try out or do, and so having access to that credit, which by that time around March 2020 had grown to 10,000, it was just like, I have the money to do it. Even though I don't have the money to do it, I have access to someone else's money to do it. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So I think to the part about what it does to us psychologically, it tells us that we have more money than we do.
And you mean it, when you say it, you mean like loans or credit cards or?
I'm sorry, I mean credit cards.
Credit cards, okay.
Yeah, so good catch there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's packaged the same way as a debit card, which is my money.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no difference between when I swipe the debit card and when I swipe the credit card in terms of my experience whatsoever. I get a notification after I swipe on both sides. And when I swipe a credit card, it doesn't tell me how much interest I have to pay because that gets calculated after the statement closes. For me, at that time, that was the biggest impact. It was just tricking me into thinking that I could do and should do more than I really had the funds
to do. I definitely can relate to that. So at some point, I also had credit card debt that it wasn't up to 10K, but it was close.
That's all right.
Right. I mean, yeah, it was very close to $10,000. And thinking back to that time, I think one of the things that was happening was I didn't really need to plan anymore. So typically, when I want to get something now, or when I was in Nigeria, right? Because when I was in Nigeria, I had no credit cards. At least at the time, even until now, credit cards are not really a big thing that people use. So most people, it's
heard that before.
Yeah, it's very cash basis. So if you see someone have something, they worked hard, saved up money and got it. That's typically how it works. And that's how I was brought up. So then credit cards just changed that orientation a bit. I didn't really need to plan as much. You could just get it. You could just go buy it and you pay it off later. And then that later just never comes. It just keeps compounding and compounding and compounding. And at some point, like it really sneaks up on you. And at some point, you're wondering where all the money went. I'll read my statements and I'm like, how did I spend all of this money? So I do agree with you. And in my own experience, yes, I think not planning, that flexibility to just go get whatever you want, whenever you want it, which is very bad. is what it enabled me to do. Now I still have credit cards though, but then I wanted to ask you, with this your experience, right? Are you then anti-credit cards?
I was for a long time,
Okay.
relative to how long I've been an adult. So it was in part because of my credit card behavior, but it was more about my car loan. Right. So the first loan I got, it was on Chrysler 2015 Chrysler 200. Right, and so it was a $13,000 car used, but I was paying $525 a month at 29.99% interest.
Gosh. Well, you bought the car using a credit card?
I bought it using a car loan,
Right.
and I was confused because I thought I had a good credit score, but I realized that later that they have different financial models that they use in terms of credit.
Oh.
When they're evaluating for like a home or a credit card or a vehicle. And so the model they used for the car loan showed my credit score much lower than the 720 I was looking at on credit card.
Gotcha.
Right, and so I had an opportunity to get out of that, I think after a couple years into a 2019 Kia Forte. And I rolled $8,000 of negative equity into that new loan at a 7.11% interest rate, and then started paying that down more. And what happened to me personally, and I'm saying this in reflecting hindsight even right now, is I was so angry about the fact that I let myself get duped that I made a vow that I would not use financing for anything again. Okay, and that was the main turning point to where I became against credit cards or even loans. Like I started paying for leases outright. Like I was just like, if I can't pay for it cash, I'm not going to have it. That's very hard in this country.
It is. It is.
You know, God leading me into an entrepreneurial route where there's less guarantees. You know, my brother's had times where having some credit would be.
Live it up. Right.
Like it seemed like the Lord wanted us to plan to buy a specific house, and we didn't have the money to pay for it cash, and so I was talking to him about the vow that I made, and I asked him if he would release me from the vow, because we were paying like $3,000 a month in rent, and it was like, well, the house would be like $1,500, and it would be a house, and it would be ours. So I believe that he gave me a sign to come out of that, and so that started a journey of me essentially rebuilding my credit profile, because I had canceled all the credit cards that I had from before. And so now actually I'm in the process of expanding my credit profile so that I have access to it before I need it. And I think that it can also be, on the credit card side, strategically used for short-term investments, right, in business. Right, so we've got a couple ventures that we're working on, and being able to access capital to put in and get it back out quickly through business revenue, I think is really useful.
Okay. So now you're not anti-credit cards?
Kind of.
Okay.
Right, I think that there are pros and cons to them. And so I wouldn't say I'm either for or against them, but I think what is most important is whether or not it's God's will for a person to have them.
You're saying God wills some people to use credit cards and some others not to?
Absolutely.
How so?
Absolutely. So I told you at one point in my life, I didn't even have the self-control to use a credit card without putting myself into bondage. Okay, at a different point, I've developed a skill set, I've developed different beliefs, I've gone through a lot of training and education to be able to understand how to leverage things and how to manage my day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, and year-to-year in order to know when I spend this money on a card, I'm actually okay with that. And and this is something that I can repay, I will repay, and this is something I can get an ROI or return on investment for.
Right.
And I think if someone doesn't have that understanding, it's probably not healthy for them. But again, my job as a planner or as an advisor is not to make the judgments for that person, is to give them advice and ultimately to seek God's will in what He's given them to do. Because if we're trying to plan how to finance a particular project, right, a credit card might be an option, but there are other options. You can get equity financing, right? You might be able to crowdfund something. And so it's like, we need to know, is this God's answer to the question that you have, or is this your answer? And if it's your answer, are you okay with it potentially not being the best answer for you?
So let me think about that. I would agree that there's this high level of self-awareness that one has to employ
Yeah.
when like in approaching like loans, credit cards, if you know that you're susceptible to a particular type of behavior, right, there's no need for you to dance around the fire if you don't want to get burned, right? Essentially, there's no need to dance around the fire if you don't want it to burn you. So how do you place contentment side by side with ambition, for example, which usually is a driver for a lot of the successes that we see? You know, somebody wanting to build a business has an ambition. Somebody wanting to create jobs, somebody wanting to make a difference. There's usually an ambition that fuels, well, I think the passion fuels the ambition, and they fit into each other maybe. So how, if I'm content, does that mean not wanting more? Which
Think of it in the inverse. It means to be happy with what you have.
Okay. So you're happy with what you have and where you are, but not necessarily that you want to be there.
So the definition of ambition is an ardent desire to achieve a particular goal, success, power, or fame. It acts as the driving force that motivates individuals to pursue personal growth, career advancement, or overcome challenges to turn their aims into a reality.
Okay.
So the difference between ambition and stewardship is ambition's driving force. The person's driving force for doing what they're doing is their desire to obtain a thing.
Okay.
Which is different from stewardship. If God says to someone, I'm going to give you, like to the Israelites, a promised land, and the hills are going to be full of copper, you will have lack of nothing. This is a big deal. But the motivation should be the love relationship that they have with God. Right? And this is the means by which they walk into what He's offering. So the difference is not, a desire to make impact, but it's the unseen thing that motivates someone to pursue what they're pursuing.
I was going to say, can I ask you a question? And then I realized I've been asking you questions this whole time.
Yeah.
So, if I'm being completely honest, there are things that I do sometimes and my motivation is not God.
Yeah.
And so, say for example, you're walking down the streets.
Am I walking down the street?
I'm walking down the streets. And I see a homeless person.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the desire that this homeless person be fed, or have a job and stuff like that. Or I'm using a technology that is terrible, and I'm just like, this is so inconvenient. I want to build something better than this. In that moment, I feel like that desire is not necessarily driven by greed or wanting to be famous. Is wanting to solve a problem or wanting to make somebody else better off than you found them. And I find a lot of examples of things like that in my daily life, more than I find like a raw desire of like, this is me personally, more than I find a desire of like, let me do this for God. And sometimes I'm like, oh, whatever you do to the least of my brothers, you do unto me. Like, I don't know if is that like the same thing? I don't know, but that's how I feel most of the time. So sometimes I think there's a disconnect when I'm having a conversation, or like I'm hearing someone say all of your motivations and the things that you're doing should be driven by wanting to do it for God. I don't know if that makes sense.
Can you give me like one specific real life example?
So starting this show, for example, this was driven by the conversations that I had with people, some of them my age, some older, and the realization that most people are really struggling when it comes to managing their money, one, and when it comes to at least around the network of people that I have relationships with, hearing real stories that they can relate to. And I felt it would be really nice to have a platform where this is what we're doing. We're having conversations, we're trying to go underneath all of the headlines that people see. Obviously, because I'm a Christian, I prayed that God would bless it, right? But I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily doing this because of God, because God is not really benefiting from this. Like, God is benefiting from this, but He's not making His life any better, in a sense. At least that's how I think about it.
Yeah, if that was the case, I mean, none of us would need to do anything, because God doesn't need any of us to do anything except for what He made us to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But the fact that He made us shows that He has a desire for our purpose to be carried out. So I think the first thing is not discounting your own value and understanding the nature and dynamic of your relationship with God. Because what you essentially just conveyed was you don't think God values really anything that you do, and He has no need for you, and you're like a petty servant, and you have bad motivations for what you do, and God probably is going to come and get you.
Dang, that sounds bad. Maybe not like that.
But what I heard, and I'll ask you a question to flesh it out, is why do you care that people are struggling managing their money?
Because I know I can help. And because...
Why is that a reason to do anything? Like, you know that you can help, but you know you can help.
Like, why do I
with a lot
care?
of things, right? But there's
Right.
a lot of things you don't do that you could help with.
True.
Why?
Do I care about this one?
Yeah.
I think this is my answer. There are interests that I have that would be sometimes challenging to find the foundation of. Some of it dates all the way back to when I was a child, and some of it were things that I just picked up on as I've continued to grow. And finance in general, I personally believe, has a lot of impact on people's well-being. It's very difficult to talk about living without talking about money. So the only people who really don't need money are the people who are not here with us.
Yeah.
Either they're yet to be born or they've lived and have gone. So whether I find it to be a connector of every race, every tribe, every language, every tongue, everybody needs money or has a need to understand how money works. And for me, because I struggled at some point, even with like my education and everything, I relate to that when I see people who are also struggling. And I just think it's like a neutral point that everybody should have a handle of, whether, regardless of their belief system and all. And then if you're a Christian and your finances are in order, I think you'll be a better Christian. But even if you're not a Christian, you can be a better human being with a proper understanding of how your money works. So I think that's why I'm doing this, because I think it's the first step towards anything else, like your finances. And then it would, just like, even if you were going for evangelism and you wanted to preach to somebody and they were hungry, you feed them first so they can even understand what you're talking about, right? So I think this is generally like a starting point. Understand what's happening with your money and have it in place, and then it would enable you to make it will give you the freedom it will release you from the chains, and then you have the freedom to do anything else that you want to do. And hopefully in that time you make whatever best decisions there are based on options available to you.
You gave me the answer. So you said what I heard, but you haven't taken hold of it yet.
Okay.
What I heard, and I'm dragging this out for a reason, it was the opposite of what you said. So you told me that you weren't doing it for God. And what I heard was, I'm doing it because I struggled and I see other people struggling and I have the ability to help them. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself.
But someone who is not a Christian could also do this with the same intention to help people.
It doesn't matter because you are a Christian.
Right? Okay.
So instead of thinking that God has to come and say to you, Chilo Tom, I want you to do this and start this podcast and it's going to be exactly like this and it's going to take 5 years to build it and you're going to have 5 million viewers.
That's exactly how God sounds, by the way.
The principal thing is love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do that, and this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, the principle is what's going to produce the fruit. So you loving people is what has created this podcast opportunity and platform. And I believe it's going to grow. Right? And so when I say opportunity, I mean, like, you didn't have a podcast before, and now you have a podcast show. So you have an opportunity to impact the lives of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people.
So if I'm at a point where, or I'm approaching a point where, I would probably start thinking about maybe starting a family, having a house, making major investments, maybe having businesses. What does that look like in terms of planning? How do I prepare for that?
You may not like the answer. The first step is asking God.
Okay.
Yes, and so we could do that together, or you could do that on your own time.
Mm-hmm.
We could do it together because it invites me spiritually into the process. Yeah, as I continue to pray about it, that God may speak certain things to me or show me a vision or give me a word to give to you. But really my job as a planner and advisor is to be an equipper for the person that I'm working with. And frankly, working for.
Okay.
Right, so every client is a decision maker in their own life.
Okay.
You see, so as we get intel from God, then we work together to build plans around that insight. Because now we know we have the information we need to build a successful plan.
Gotcha.
And I would say yes, if God is not speaking, we probably want to get that checked on first. Because if the Lord doesn't build the house, the one who labors builds it in vain.
Sounds. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share?
Yeah, I guess I would just say, like, guys, there are a lot of financial vehicles out there. There's a lot of, rules in the tax code. There's a lot of what people call loopholes and strategies and all that stuff. But just know that God knows all of those strategies. And so don't be ashamed of the gospel. Don't be ashamed of Jesus. And just be willing to go to the Father and ask Him for insight so that you know what you're building is of Him and the pathway that He's set before you, right? He doesn't usually give it all at once, but just take things step by step. And as you have questions, ask questions, right? Ask God, ask the counselors that He's given to you, and let His Spirit move in the body of Christ.
Well, this has been a very exciting conversation. We talked about a lot of things that I think would be beneficial to people when they listen to this. I certainly talked about things that I did not even plan for, but that's what makes some of the best conversations. So thank you for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure, man. And an honor.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for having me, Chilltown.
Of course. Can shake on that. Yes, sir. Well, everyone, that was Shawn Fair, an old friend and someone who I was really looking forward to having a conversation with. If this conversation was meaningful to you and you learned anything new from it, please share with somebody else that might find it meaningful. And until next time, I remain your host, Chilltown. Bye.